Welcome back. Today we're going to finally go over the Simgot EA500LM. This one's been a while in the making, and I explained all that in the last video, so we won't go over that. We're not going to go over too much of what's in the box, but you do get a case, you do get a cable, which is kind of this goldish black. It's actually kind of nice looking. I didn't actually use this cable. I used the Simgot LC7 cable, and this one is more for people who want a thicker, heavier cable. If you are not into thicker and heavier, do not buy the LC7. It's quite a thick one, and but I like it. I like it very much, and I tended to. I didn't actually open or use the stock one at all. So LC7, this is what it looks like up close. So lots of reminiscent of the original EA500. This is more of a gunmetal color, and the LM is the lithium magnesium driver that is inside of this. So all that's all good. All that is kind of things that we've gone over before, and I will say that I will tend to stay more neutral on this one, and a lot of it goes back to the driver. So yes, I do think the driver is fantastic, and I'm not sure there's going to be another driver put out that is as capable and highest performing, or a higher performing driver than what you get in LM at this price point. But that's not everything, right? You actually hear some of the driver, but mostly you hear the tuning, and the tuning is like past Simgot sets, and it's going to be appealing to some people and not as appealing to other people. So I will talk about the things that I liked about it, things I didn't like as much, and try to stay on more of the pro and con side as opposed to just saying how fantastic the driver is and it's the best thing ever. We'll try to stay sort of in the middle of that, but we'll kind of start right at the basics. If you're trying to decide between LM and EA500, I think they scored an easy win with LM. And if you just look at the graph, you kind of get an idea as to why that is. So EA500, the red nozzle in the blue, kind of down here and down here. LM boosted the bass, so a lot of people ended up modding the EA500. I am one of them, to get a curve that was very similar to what they gave us in LM. So I think right away they gave people, for the most part, what they wanted: a more bassy, more sub bass, kind of a more general appealing sound, because it didn't really have this neutral style bass. Give people something that works more with pop music. And they also popped the treble here, which I will say I'm not that much of a fan of. So they ended up creating more of a V shape, and that V shape I think is going to be more general appealing. If you don't know what you want, you'll tend to gravitate towards more bass than less bass. I think that's fair. But the way I think I said, if you're deciding between the two and you want neutral bright, you pretty much want EA500. If you want anything other than neutral bright, you're probably in the LM camp. LM with a V-shaped bass level is going to be more general appealing. If you don't know what you want, I think that is the one you're going to gravitate towards. So the harder win is, if you already have EA500, is it really a direct upgrade to, is LM a direct upgrade to EA500? And a lot of it, I will say, also comes down to the graph, right? So V-shapes tend to have V-shaped problems, and the mids may fall back. This sub bass may cloud some of the resolving, super driver, super resolving, but when you throw a lot of sub bass at it, it tends to mask some things that are going on here. This is a bit bright. So yeah, I think they did some things that are going to be more appealing to you if you already have 500. If you were looking for a 500 that was more resolving, they didn't quite give you that. They kind of gave you something that was more bassy, more trebly, and tended to not necessarily bring out, some of the standout parts on the driver. And I would say the same thing about any V-shaped set. It's very hard to hit those optimal points on the driver when you're kind of boosting the sub bass and then boosting this to the point where people are going to say it's bright. So yeah, I think that is going to be a harder win. I think there's no denying that the driver is better. Does it come through on your genres and on your playlist? That's kind of where you get into how this tuning sits with the music that you like to listen to. But, I think generally, if you were one of those people who modded EA500 for more bass, that's pretty much what they gave you in LM. So again, why is everyone modding LM? EA500 was neutral bright. ELM is a bright V-shape, more bass and more treble. And I did find my piece with the gold nozzle with no foam in it. But again, it's more of a V-shape compared to 500. 500 was sort of neutral bright. This one is more, I would call it U-shape. It's got a really heavy sub-bass presence. And then this little bit is going to be bright, and it gets brighter depending on what nozzle you're looking at. So I do think that it takes on more of a U-shape, and the brightness sort of cuts through some of the boosted bass level, and it ends up being more of a V-shape, leaning bright. So why are people modding it? Because they tended to like the EA500 level. So if you actually mod it, and I actually did it with these are 350s. So if you put a 350 on it, you pretty much hit the Harman line. So it's the line between the gold nozzle, which is in the red, and the red on EA500. If you throw 350, you're pretty much going to be right on the Harman line in between the two, kind of halfway between. I thought that one was pretty good. Other people kind of modding the silver one. I think there's variations on putting more foam and all these other things. I won't talk too much about that because that's not how I listen to it. So is the driver better? And I think yes, as I said. The tuning, the source, the music, the tips, and the mods, I think all those things will slide it closer to EA500. So I think in its raw form, when I heard EA500 out of the box with the red and the black tips, I thought it was like the most resolving thing I've heard in a long time. And I said that to Simgo, and I also said it's too bright. So that was where the gold nozzle, and that's where the red. So the red and the black were essentially over where the red was, and that was too intense. It's like really intense. So yes, I do think the driver itself is very highly resolving, but can you find a tuning that works for your library and your preferences? That's sort of the harder part about deciding with LM, and that's why I wouldn't call it a perfect win. I think we'll go over, and I think that was actually my next section, of course. So is it perfect? And I'll say no. I think the tuning does have some things to be aware of. And as I was just talking about, the black and the red nozzles are probably too bright for most people. The gold, which can be removed, so remove it and then A/B it. So the foam in the gold, and I didn't listen to it with the foam at all, tends to look like this. So you get two little foam pieces that are sitting in the gold nozzle. Feel free to remove the gold nozzle, remove the foam, listen to it, put the foam back into it, listen to it. For me, it really affected sort of the sound stage. So the height of what you hear on LM was pretty much affected by what they did with the foam. And that was why I was kind of hesitant to review it without hearing the gold nozzle. I sort of had an idea that's what they were going to do, and that's exactly what they did, and it actually had the results of what I thought was going to have happen. And it was very similar to what actually happened on the E1000. So they're probably not into soundstage all that much, so putting some foam in there kind of cuts down some frequencies that shrunk the stage down in height. So you end up, it was kind of wide, but things tended to be more overlapping. The layering wasn't as good, the imaging wasn't as good. It just kind of shrunk everything down a little bit, and maybe it made it a little more easy to listen to. But for me, it was sort of a no, kind of within a couple minutes. I'm like, this is not going to work. It really kind of smashed the stage, and I wasn't a big fan. So I will say the gold is good, but I didn't like it with the foam at all. I never put it back in. It was no good for me, but do try it with the foam. Do try it without the foam. See if you can tell there's a difference to you. Maybe there will. Maybe there will not be. But that is a really quick option to get it to the point where it might be more sound better with your library or your ears or your genres, whatever it is. Really quick way to unmod it, and get a feel for how that sounds. So I do wish the sub bass was dipped down also. And I'll talk about sub bass a few times. So this arcing up thing in the sub bass, they didn't do that on EA1000. EA1000 kind of curves right in between the two. I thought that was the optimal bass shelf, and I actually like the way EA1000 did that. This rising through the sub bass just tends to add a little bit too much sub bass for what I prefer. And again, super driver, I don't want some of this to cloud, what I hear in the mids. And that's sort of where it got to the point where I kind of said it would have been better if they had just tilted this down the way they did EA1000. EA500 didn't have that problem because it's already tilted down, but somewhere right in between the two, I think would have been a really nice combination. But yeah, if you embrace that sub bass, it's actually a pretty decent level of sub bass. If that's your thing and you find that lots of fun, then yeah, I think this set becomes a lot less serious, a more fun set, and you can kind of play your sub bassy music. And actually it sounds quite good, but maybe not in the same way that other people are going to listen to it because they want to hear the LM driver and how resolving it is. It's kind of two different sets in that way. So the note weight, again, kind of interesting the way that the bass shelf affects that. It sounds more U-shaped to me. So I tended to hear it a little bit thinner with a big fat sub bass. I wish it was more linear hitting the mids. It can just sound a little less forgiving on some tracks because it's a little bit thinner. Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, his voice is just up there and it's a little kind of sharp. And rock in general, it has more of a U shape as opposed to carrying a little bit more warmth into the mids. You can just use a little bit more mid-bass body. And I think these genres that really rely on, I think they created a little daylight between EA500 on the mid-bass and where LM is. Yeah, it's just the way it sounds. It comes off as really U-shaped, and like almost this is dipped down a little bit more than it is on the graph. And yeah, I do wish they had poked in another decibel or two right there. It would give it a little bit more impact. It would give it a little bit more body. It would have worked better for genres like rock and metal is really hard on this one because this is dipped, 1 decibel, 1 or 2, a little low. This is a little bit brighter. The combination isn't necessarily one set that I would say was great for metal. Yeah, I do wish the bass shelf was probably a little bit more like EA1000. I think people who are into sub bass and genres that hit it, I think will find that tons of fun. People who are kind of more serious into the mid areas and the mid bass areas and body and note weights, and I think those things will find this combination a little bit more challenging with tips and sources to get it dialed into how you like it. So the driver is very resolving, and you should really listen to that red nozzle. Like I said, it's a little bit bright, but get used to hearing it at its full resolution, kind of at the max it can resolve before switching to the gold, because the gold has some foam in it. It's going to bring it back down, and it's going to be not quite as resolving as it could be, but just try both of them. And adding filters or foams, it's only going to make it sound less transparent and less resolving. And you better have a resolving source that goes along with it if that's your thing, because it will reflect that as well. So I think even their own dongle, I think, wasn't quite as resolving as the set could be. I think they did a warm and smooth dongle, and that's okay. It actually counterbalances some of the brightness to it. But when you get down to hearing how well the LM can resolve, I'm not sure this dongle perfectly pairs for LM in that way. But it's a cool dongle. Still playing around with it. I think I found some peace hooking it up to an amp, using it as more of a DAC as opposed to a DAC amp. But we'll talk about that some other time. But yeah, I think do play with the nozzles and listen to it and listen for its ability to resolve at the brighter level, and then listen to the gold and try with the gold with foam, without the foam, and see where you can find your piece in balancing the brightness and its ability to resolve in your ear. So the bass, again, like I said, set up for popular music, generally appealing sound. It pushes a lot of energy onto the sub bass, carries a little bit into the mid bass to make it slightly warm. And that's really not all that unique. I think the heavy bass set, heavy sub bass boom is not all that uncommon, with lighter mid bass impact, and that's really what you get here. Again, sounds more U-shaped on Miley Cyrus' Wrecking Ball. Kind of where you're looking for that impact is not quite there. And then a track like London Grammar's Hey Now, at a minute 20, where the bass kind of kicks in, you're like, yeah, this is pretty good. They kind of nailed the bass shelf. And then as you work into at 2 minutes, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. I think it does overstep. And again, I think they should have just tilted this down just a little bit, and that would have stop this overstepping effect and taking over the stage and taking over some of the mids. I think they could have tweaked that a little bit better, and possibly with some EQ, you'd probably pretty much nail that. Some tips might help that as well, but you know, I just kind of nitpick the bass because it affects everything else, and I would EQ the sub down a bit and maybe poke in some more impact on the mid bass, kind of in the way that EA1000 sounds if that was needed. But as I said, my favorite part of LM is going to be the mids, and it's really those moments of transparency and where there's not a whole lot of bass clouding up anything. There's not a whole lot of sub bass, and that's really why I nitpicked their level and talked about it so much, is there's some real magic there in the mids, but every time I heard some sub bass getting in the way, I was kind of got annoyed or slightly annoyed. The set's very special, and there's just moments of acoustic music where it sounds more neutral, more natural, more resolving. It's really special, and that's why everyone talks about this set as a special set in that way. The driver is very special, but it's sort of bounded by the music that you put into it and the source you have and how it's hitting the U-shape, the bass side, and that treble level. Those moments where it reverbs and decays and dynamics with speed and textures, really special. And I think those moments, it does sound like a top-tier dynamic driver. I don't think that you can deny that. Tracks like Eric Clapton's Layla, the unplugged MTV version, anything on Tori Amos' Little Earthquakes, I'm kind of a big fan of hers, of Crucify, Little Earthquakes, the title track, Perfect Things, what's the PT? Something like that. Man, there's a lot of tracks, and her music just sits, because she has female vocals, and it kind of sits in that upper mid the way it should. All that stuff sounds really, really great on this set. And when EA500LM sits in that pocket of not having too much sub bass or not having too much treble, it's really amazing, and almost a different set from when it's out of the pocket. So when it's out of the pocket, kind of where I was going with London Grammar's Hey Now, too much bass tends to sound a little bit overwhelming. Too much treble gets to be a little bit more brighter, a little bit more unforgiving. You get more of that U-shape effect. It just sounds a little bit thinner. Sometimes it sounds like too much sub bass and thinner. Sometimes, I think Adele's Hello essentially runs the whole transition from all that. It starts off really, really nice because it's just her voice, and it sits kind of lower. It sounds very natural and textured and everything that you want from a top-tier DD. And then as you get into the track more and more, it tends to pick up this a little thinner, a little bit more unforgiving. And you just kind of wish that the guys at Simgot, that tuner, was like, just relax on the treble, just a little bit, man. Just knock it back, kind of where EA500 was, just so it comes across as a little bit, more organic and more analog and not so sharp and not so trying to prove this is the best dynamic driver ever. That's kind of the way it comes across and the level that they picked. So the treble, again, this one is kind of a pick a nozzle, and that will be what you hear. They're all on the bright side. And to be honest, if you're going to do bright, it's better to be super resolving, and that's really what they did here. So I can't really, really complain about what they did, but it's just a high level of treble and a high level of resolving ability on the driver, and the two kind of go together. And they obviously set those levels to make sure people knew what was going on, but do pay attention to those filters and foams so as to not lose any of that area extension. Anytime you're putting stuff on top of the nozzle, in the nozzle, on foams, that's going to really affect some of those higher level frequencies, and it's really easy to hear it on this one because it's so resolving. So as I said, gold nozzle with the foam was kind of a no-go for me, like in the first 2 minutes. So be aware of those things. And stage is the same thing. Where filters and foams might help or hurt, it's going to change quite a bit how you interpret the stage on this one. That's why I went with gold with no foam, simply because the stage height was at a level where I thought it sounded pretty good. But it's definitely going to vary quite a bit, and it's going to vary quite a bit with your source. But when it's done right, I think it is very close to an immersive presentation, as it should be. And anything that I felt was detracting from that, I tended to shy away from, whether that was the 350 on the nozzle, whether that was their dongle. anything that took away from the stage presentation, I tended to shy away from, and that's why I ended up with gold nozzle, no foam, hooking this up to a headphone amp, and probably not going to use the 350s. I didn't think there was that much of a benefit to it, but I know some people will pretty much nail the 350 and say that's fine. But that is my story on EA500LM. So that one went kind of long. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.